Arizona at Cleveland next. Big change at quarterback for both teams, potentially. Looks like it's going to be Clayton Tune against PJ Walker, but equally it could be Kyler Murray versus Deshaun Watson. Does that change things for you, depending on who starts at quarterback, Tom?
It could be that Clayton Tune against PJ Walker might actually be the better matchup with how, Murray's coming back from the knee injury. Deshaun Watson's been just atrocious for the last couple of years. I think I'd probably feel, I don't know. I mean, PJ Walker's been okay. I think we've kind of seen enough for him that it's been fine. David Njoku's been better without Deshaun Watson over the course of the last 2 seasons. Njoku's averaging 11.04 PPR points without Watson, 8.3 per game with Watson. And I pointed this out on Twitter. That's the difference between tight end 8 and tight end 18. It's such fine margins at the position. And what we've seen is Njoku is getting more targets from PJ Walker. So I'd feel better about starting him. Amari Cooper's a fringe starter for me every week. It's been frustrating because he is the wide receiver 41 in points per game. He doesn't seem to string back-to-back games together at any point. But I don't think there's anything about this Arizona team that scares anyone. When you look at the stats, the Cardinals rank second worst in catch rate allowed to opposing wide receivers, allowing 71% of targets to be caught, those catchable targets, and they allow the 10th most fantasy points per game to the position. So I'd be starting Amari Cooper here. I think you can play Amari Cooper as a one-off in DFS this week. Jerome Ford, it seems like dealing with a high ankle sprain or low ankle sprain. Not able to play fully, but they still rolled him out there for some snaps. In terms of what you can play on the Arizona side of things, Cleveland allow the third lowest amount of fantasy points to wide receivers, second lowest catch rate at only 51%. Cleveland allow the fewest fantasy points to tight ends. They allow the 11th fewest points to running backs. So as Paul says in the chat, just avoid all Cardinals this week unless you really have to. Even Trey McBride coming off a 25 PPR point game, I don't think you can start him against this Cleveland defense on the road.
Yeah, I think the one player I want to touch on that I think you probably gave a little bit short shift to, Jerome Ford. 22 of his 26 snaps last week were in the third and fourth quarter. When the game was on the line, when the Browns needed to try and win the game, they turned over to Jerome Ford. And I think that speaks massively in terms of his potential fantasy implications moving forward. I think that he is still the 1A in this backfield. And I think that another week to hopefully get that ankle a little bit healthier, I'm expecting him to get an even bigger workload than he did last week. Yes, for DFS, it might not be a big enough workload to enter things like cash lineups and stuff like that. But in terms of your redraft, your dynasty lineups, I still think he's a solid, reliable RB2 this week and a guy that I'm touching on. Also, right. Oh, God.
I was just going to say on that, I mean, the counter argument against what I'd kind of said there would be to sort of say, okay, well, you look at the Cardinals last week and they just got absolutely destroyed on the ground by Gus Edwards. It was one of those kind of performances where they just couldn't stop the Ravens. The Ravens didn't run heavy in the first half of the game. Then the second half turned to it. They've allowed the third most fantasy points per game to the running back position. They've also allowed an average of 1 touchdown per game to the running back position in just rushing production. There's only 2 teams worse than that in terms of touchdowns allowed per game. So, yeah, perhaps I'm skirting over Ford just a little bit, and at $200 cheaper than Hunt on DraftKings, it's probably an interesting play. Maybe he's one I'll get to over the weekend and add into the Discord.
Yeah, and then Trey McBride. I mean, last week's usage was absolutely mental. It was the best single game usage any tight end has seen this year. It was the most snaps he'd played so far this year. But to me, the biggest signal that I don't think I've heard anyone talk about this week, he lined up as a wide receiver 33 times last week. He hasn't broken 16 so far this year in terms of snaps in the slot or out wide. The fact that he is now not just a 70, 80% inline guy, he's going to be used all over the field. That's amazing for his fantasy potential because we know those routes run from the slot are much more valuable than routes run inline. So yeah, very excited that Arizona are finally using him as to be what they drafted him to be 18 months ago.